Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the Morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
I want our workplaces to look like the societies that we live in.
Racial balancing is what a lot of people would call that.
It is harming society.
But you don't think that the previous system was also socially engineered?
Let's say we can crush the whole thing right now and build it from scratch. What would good DEI look like to you?
I've been the Chief Diversity Officer of Fortune 500 companies.
I served for 5 years as a diversity officer.
I was a DEI officer.
I was the Chief Sustainability Officer, and DEI was a component of what I was doing.
Okay, first question. Is DEI discriminatory?
The tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
See, the values of diversity, equality, inclusion are core strengths of America.
DEI innately means that people who are unqualified are going to advance in life by dint of the fact that they are considered a part of a victimized group.
You should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender.
Well, it depends on the DEI you're talking about. I think contemporary DEI, a lot of the manifestations are discriminatory by nature, but they don't have to be. The discriminatory kind is the kind that is really about, oppressor versus oppressed. So it's inherently discriminatory, and that you're pitting people in each category just by looks or identity or something like that. But when I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think of no discrimination whatsoever. It's more like the 60s civil rights kind of classical liberal take on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So I think it's completely discriminatory. I think it institutionalizes racism, like it's a direct attack on meritocracy. Everything becomes, it's about your identity. I'm all for equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And there's no place in the workplace for identity politics.
So when I think about DEI, I think about the conceptual ideals behind it, and then there's the interpretation and the implementation. And I think conceptually speaking, no one would disagree that DEI in principle would be a set of good things to have. As you mentioned, equality is a good thing to have. But I think the implementation is what makes it very difficult. And you mentioned equality of outcome. And I think that may be a myth around what equity is intended to mean. So when we talk about equity, it's not really equity of outcomes. It's equity of opportunity, equity of access, equity of information. The key is not to equate everyone at the outcome level. And I would agree, if that were the case, that would be discriminatory. But I think the key is to make sure that everybody has a level playing field. And that's just not the reality that we have. And that's where equity is important.
Who decides that, though? Someone has to be in charge. Why can't you just let the market do it?
Well, here's the thing, right? We can assume that the market will drive it, but women have been graduating at the top, have been graduating with the majority of undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees since 1983, so over 40 years. Yet women still make up a tiny, small percentage of senior leaders within organizations. Do we assume that that is because women are simply not as meritorious of success, and they somehow, going from undergraduate and graduate school to the corporate world, they somehow lose their capabilities? Or can we say there's a system in place within corporations that favor certain characteristics that are very gendered and biased? I actually don't think that any of us are necessarily disagreeing. Like, my goal is to create more perfect meritocratic organizational systems. Right now, we have systems in place that favor certain characteristics over another, and the goal is removing those discriminatory biased systems.
How are you doing that? You're imposing bureaucracy.
Actually not.
Quota system
but DEI has never been a quota system.
Exactly.
It is.
I have never instituted, in my 25 years of doing this work, I have never set a quota. I'm looking at system, and the way that you look at system is through deep, boring statistical analysis to see if we hold all things equal, what is the degree to which various different protected classes impact. So, for example,
what is a protected class? I don't even
protected
understand.
class is what
language.
is. Yeah, so that's the problem. A lot of people, no, not you, but the problem is that a lot of people who have become practitioners in the last couple of years don't know the legacy. What is a protected class? It's what is articulated in the civil rights laws of the 1960s and 70s. And a protected class is gender. It's not women, it's gender. A protected class is race. So I'll give you a really good example. If a white man came to me and said, I am being discriminated based on my race as a white man, and there's data and there's proven documentation of that discrimination, that is a case that DEI would advocate for, because race is a protected class.
I think in academia, that white person would get laughed out of the room.
And that's the problem.
I would agree with this premise in academia as well. It's not something that would be considered a case that could be taken up, for example, to an office of DEI. I agree with you that in principle that should be the case, but that's not the implementation. That's not what's happening. I just want to mention one other thing about the meritocracy issue that you mentioned. I think that we're under the impression that there is this meritocracy that we need to be able to preserve. But the rules that we apply, if somebody's applying for a job or somebody is going up for a promotion, are ingrained in discriminatory behavior. In general, you have a system that is not actually promoting meritocracy the way that we want.
I think that we have made the world much more discriminatory, and we've moved further from meritocracy. Every corporation I've worked at, and I've worked at some of the biggest ones, there was always a quota system. I had a regular, kind of mainstream investment banking career. And then, I fell for this ideology. I thought that the quota system would create, equal opportunities.
Harvard has, we believe, a hard, specific quota.
Their boards needed to conform with certain gender, race, and sexual orientation quotas.
A few spots would be reserved for minority applicants.
But actually, the result was that it actually institutionalized more discrimination, more racism. And everyone's kind of looking around. It's like, holy like I'm working so hard, but my identity is going to determine whether or not I get that board seat. That's when the penny dropped for me. Nobody should be imposing a social construct and choosing who, is in a seat of power. It should be merit-based.
Sean?
Yeah.
My work as a DEI officer accomplished nothing. Initially, it accomplished some things. People showed up for workshops that were informative, but then things started to happen. Fewer people would show up, or the same 5 people would show up. So it wasn't a great experience. It didn't accomplish much at all, and that's my story.
We rigged everything. So that was my story. So I was supposed to set diversity targets, and I reported directly to the CEO in a board meeting. I'm actually given a script. It says, the top, main management, there should be a gender ratio of 27%. So I'm looking down, I'm like, 27%? Why 27%? I didn't give that number. I mean, aren't we supposed to be shooting for 50-50 or something like that? And global head of HR said, well, we're right now at 27%. And I'm like, holy you're rigging the target. And they rigged the target because guess what? The CEO's comp was linked to DEI.
And this goes back to something that Michael said. There's what DEI is and then what it has become in recent years. I think that the situation you described is horrible. And I would have been the first person to be like, this is ridiculous. We're rigging the system. I mean, I wouldn't have done the work for as long as I did if I didn't think that I was having some kind of impact, because my whole goal is to make things better. I was the first C-suite level chief diversity officer at Uber Technologies, and I was hired during a particularly intense period of crisis.
More than 200 claims of sexual harassment, bullying, and inappropriate behavior.
Unfair pay and other workplace discrimination.
And I think we did a pretty good job. I brought a very rigorous approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. For the first 30 years of its existence as a career, as a profession, was a very niche field. There were maybe a few hundred practitioners in all of the United States, and frankly, we pretty much knew each other. And then in the last 5 to 6 years, that number of practitioners quadrupled in size, quintupled in size. That's when you got into a lot of the more performative, more symbolic gestures. And I think that's when the work became far less impactful. I've been doing the work since before it was called DEI, before it was called D&I. It was mostly just called Women in the Workplace. That's actually how a lot of the work began. I implemented the very first parental leave policy. I implemented the first accessibility, disability, ADA compliance rules, right? The most successful elements of a DEI program have become so interwoven into the norms of what we think this is just what a good workplace looks like, that people have forgotten these are the things that DEI does.
So I became chief diversity officer in a school affiliated with a major university in 2020. So this was just after George Floyd, and initially my mandate was based on statistics. There's fundamentally a problem with the numbers that we're seeing right now with our faculty, with our graduate students, with our undergraduate students, and we need these numbers to really reflect the communities that we serve. And when I stepped into that role, I realized that this is not something that a quota system can fix. This is not something where we can say, we just need to hire more Black people or more Hispanic people. That is not the solution. The solution is to figure out if there are systemic inequities that are preventing this from happening. So we found out very quickly that jobs were being advertised through a few venues that were only accessible to certain groups of individuals and not others, that were not visible to certain individuals. And by fixing that problem, we start to get a lot more applications from other groups. But again, my views on this are nuanced. So the reason I want to go back to what Eric said earlier, accomplish nothing, I actually align with that view. If DEI efforts are actually successful, then you should not need a DEI officer. You should not need a DEI officer. You should not need an independent thing. It should be ingrained into the culture of the organization that you're serving. And as soon as I stepped out of that role, everything that we've done disappeared, all of the initiatives disappeared, the funding for it disappeared, and nobody cared anymore. It just went away, which tells me it was fragile to begin with. It was not set up as a foundational set of elements. And that's exactly, it's performative. So I wrote an op-ed for Inside Higher Education titled Confessions of a Reformed DEI Officer. I talked about some of our successful experiences when it came to hiring initiatives, when it came to improving outcomes for students, but I also spoke out against things that I thought were very performative.
We acknowledge this land, which is named for the Ute tribe.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Olekma Ohlone tribe.
We want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft campus is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish.
I basically said that I don't believe in land acknowledgments because I think that they are used as a band-aid, as a way to be able to say, hey, we did something, we gestured in some way, but there's no real substance behind it. So what's the point of all this aside from just making ourselves feel good about saying it and putting it on the website? Agree or disagree, I value diversity in my workplace.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over-opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over-Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over-Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/Over-Opinionated. /overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Overopinionated with Josh Scott. Why, he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth.
We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
I agree.
I value it. Yes, I value it. I don't always value the way it's achieved, right? I mean, we did talk about quota systems already. They do exist. I'm glad they don't exist in your world. I'm very happy about that. But they do exist in other people's worlds. And that is something that I don't value. For various reasons. A reason that doesn't come up very much is how the minority person feels knowing that there was some kind of quota or something like that, and how other people may treat him or her based on that. We don't talk about that enough. That is a thing.
I don't want to be seen as being the diversity hire.
I just graduated from Columbia University. I suspect that I would have gotten in if I were white or Asian, but I don't actually know that.
I have a black female surgeon. My first assumption will be this person had to meet lower standards.
That has come up so much in my career, where a lot of women who got promoted to partner or who got promoted to managing director, people would come up to them and literally be like, it must be nice that you got promoted because you're a woman. Or it must be nice that you got promoted because you're black. It did create that idea that they got there at a special treatment. And so a lot of the work that you have to do is actually transparency of the systematic changes that you've made. The single most impactful thing that I've ever done to transform how people looked at talent during promotion processes wasn't to set a quota. It was to simply give every manager on a team, here's a list of people who are eligible for promotion. Here's the criteria. Here's how long they've been enrolled. Here's how long, here's their performance history. That little mental trick gives people going, oh, I didn't even realize that Sally was eligible for promotion. And I appreciate a workplace that looks like the community that I live in. And we live in a diverse society, and I want our workplaces to look like the societies that we live in.
Racial balancing is what a lot of people would call that. You know,
I would not.
Okay. Oh my God, I have the big one. Hypothetical scenario. Two equally qualified candidates are applying for the same role. One is a racial minority. The other is not. Should their identities be factors in who gets the job?
Equally qualified.
There's no such thing.
Yeah, right. There's
no such thing.
Are they clones?
Yeah.
The one's painted brown?
That's what's hypothetical.
I personally could not respond to that hypothetical because I've never seen that hypothetical exist in the real world.
How about we take this and we turn this, because I think we're all going to agree here. But let's flip this hypothetical scenario to this. Let's just say you have this great visionary CEO, right, who's not like a biased asshole, just like the policy is hire the best. How would you guys feel if, in hiring the best, there is a room, like 10 executives, they're all white, they're all named Bill, but there's like true debate? Would that be okay at your organization?
So there's actually research that shows I could have 8 Asian women around me. Even if there's ideological differences, we will find the things that we share in common and we'll build a bond based on that. Where diversity of thought really comes up is when you are reminded on a daily basis, this person is somehow different from me, right? This person is probably not going to have the same life experience as me. And that is great. But it's research. It's not research. That's McKinsey. It's academic research. It's academic research.
A lot of this research has been debunked. Why can't we just judge people on their performance, their merit, their mind?
I want you to talk to me before you know who I am. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that doesn't happen a lot. People are saying, oh, you're different, and I have to take that into consideration. I didn't tell you that. Have a model get a say in how you treat me.
But going back to your point, Desiree, if you do have a room that is filled with, white men named Bill, in academic circles as well, when you have a group that is very homogeneous, they tend to produce lesser quality research. They tend to produce far less technologically innovative products. All of those things tend to go down when you have homogeneity.
A lot of this stuff has been debunked.
I think a lot of the racial equity stuff you're talking about, yes, there's data for and against, but the idea that diversity actually enhances the quality of a workplace, when we talk about diversity broadly construed, when it's really perspective diversity, that has been reproduced thousands of times at this point across so many different, but exactly, perspective diversity. So you're going beyond just race, ethnicity, gender. You're really talking about diversity.
And then you're talking about the quality, the person, and it doesn't matter what they look like or what their name.
But that's where we don't disagree.
You don't know.
I think
like my experience,
I don't think any of us
is very different.
I don't think any of us disagree with that opinion. That our experiences, our ideologies, our perspectives are the most important thing. But someone's going to look at me, and I'll tell you, people look at me, they look at my name, and they're like, she's a first-generation immigrant. She's going to be quiet and docile. I have been treated like a stereotypical Asian woman countless times in my life, and I reject that because I'm not.
Why are you enforcing it?
I'm not enforcing any. I'm not.
I don't think she is.
I'm not enforcing. You're projecting how the work gets done, not listening to how I do the work.
But if this is the case, it doesn't matter if everyone in the room kind of looks like each other. You just made the point. We all have different experiences. It's not based on, your image. And that is my point. No one should be socially engineering any organization.
Agreed.
I agree.
But can we go back to the question, the hypothetical for a second? Because I think it is actually a good hypothetical, even though you may not, that's why it's a hypothetical. We may not see it out in the real world, right? But given to similarly or identically qualified individuals, but, different races or maybe even different genders, which one would you hire? If they're bringing different perspectives, let's say they're bringing a perspective that I don't have enriched around that table right now, that might make them more qualified. So it's in context. It's not just, the individual is not diverse. Diversity is a quality of the collective, right?
A common misconception about DEI is
that it's all about race.
I totally agree with that it's all about race,
that everyone involved wants to tear down Western civilization. Like that. See, and here's the thing. In academia, the people I know who are in charge of DEI initiatives and things like that do want to tear down the world and do hate capitalism.
Yes.
And it's not even a question. Yeah. You can't even, here are the merits of capitalism. You can't even do that.
Yeah. I used to do this little exercise with all the teams that I would run, and I'd periodically do it. And I'd always, during a team meeting, go, why does our team exist here at the company? And my teams would give me these highfalutin answers. And I'm like, no. Our team exists to help our organization increase revenue. If you don't believe our goal is to help increase shareholder value, I said, you're on the wrong team. Go do this work in a nonprofit. Like I always said, we can show that there is a better way to make revenue than simply allowing for a singular identity of talent to flow through an organization.
That level of pragmatism is missing from so much DEI.
I agree. I agree 100%. Yes.
Okay, but McKinsey did a study and linked DEI, so the most diversified companies, looking at, board level or management, is more profitable. And that McKinsey study has been debunked, right? It was flawed. It cherry-picked data. There is no linkage between DEI and profitability. Like it or not, all of the propaganda about how diversified the company looks, it actually takes away from the company. I think that the world would be much better. We would have much more debate and we'd have a greater speaking up culture if DEI...
I think they're attributing way too much to DEI here.
Something has changed in academia because 15 years ago I was considered a bleeding heart liberal and now I'm a Nazi. By the same people, right? Something's changed.
Yeah.
I don't know how the Overton window has shifted that far, but it has shifted. In 2019, I heard a keynote address at a conference for rhetoric that teaching standard English to students of color, particularly black students, was inherently racist. I spoke out against the keynote address. I said we should not be demonizing standardized English like this. It's a valuable tool. I was attacked and called a white supremacist. I realized what this ideology really was. It wasn't about, equality regardless of skin color or sex or ethnicity or whatever. It wasn't about having everybody get the resources they need to fulfill their dreams. I still want the world to be a diverse and equal place, but the way it's being done in too many institutions is not to my liking.
Okay. Agree or disagree, equity is more important than equality. Maybe I'll start with this one. I'm sure all of you have seen like these caricatures that show equity versus equality over the fence and all that. There's a caricature of equity to try to paint a picture whereby it's different from equality. And it depicts three individuals at varying heights, and they're all trying to watch the ball game, but behind a barrier. And the barrier, of course, obscures the view from the shortest individual, makes it so that the taller individual has access directly. And to have equality, you provide the same kind of stool for everyone, but you still have an inability of the shortest individual to be able to see the game. And with equity, what you do is you provide additional stools to allow even the shortest person to see it. When we think about the ways that equity has been implemented, in terms of if somebody is coming from a different background or has not had access, providing them with a differential level of resources, they can get up to that level playing field. That's a Band-Aid. That is a temporary fix. If we don't actually work to resolve whatever systemic inequity there is, then that's always going to fail. So I like to see that whole wall just coming down so that there's nothing that's preventing anyone from succeeding. But if there's this wall and we're trying to figure out how do we get the right level of access to be able to overcome that wall, the problem is we still have a wall.
Okay, I think there's a difference between a barrier and an obstacle. Barrier is something that shouldn't be there. Right? We shouldn't have to overcome it. It should go away. But people look at obstacles and see barriers. AP English isn't a barrier.
Yes, I agree.
Don't get rid of it because people aren't overcoming it. Right? I think that's the issue. I think a lot of obstacles are being called barriers.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Like, I think that people sometimes see rigor and inclusion as being oppositional forces, right? Like they're like, oh, we have to remove rigor in order to be inclusive. And I'm like, no. We keep the rigor there. But to your point, what are the systematic barriers that prevent certain populations of people from getting access to AP classes? And one of them is they don't offer AP classes in lower income schools. How do we change that? But you don't change the standards of the AP classes once you introduce them into those schools. You shouldn't. You shouldn't change them at all. And I believe that's why DEI exists, because there are those barriers.
I think this whole equity thing is communist propaganda. Life is unfair. There will always be differences and barriers and obstacles, whatever. And through freedom, as Milton Friedman said, we will get more equality.
In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others.
We just need to work as hard as we can, and things kind of just shake out.
Can I just ask you, so it seems like you're taking a real hardline view on this. And I'm just curious, was there ever a time where you believed that some measure of equity was appropriate?
100%.
And what did that look like for you?
So I was one of the biggest champions of DEI. And then I red-pilled in 2020, 2021, because I saw the adverse outcomes. The intentions were good. They were, right? But it wasn't that we just practice it badly. It was that it is bad. It is harming society.
That's where critical social justice comes in. That's the kind of DEI you're talking about right now. That is influenced by Marxism, but I don't think they're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's all the same. It doesn't matter.
It's not all the time. You can't consolidate something that is very complex into these like sound bites of like you're saying like freedom was better than DEI, and I'm like and social and that DEI is social engineering. But you don't think that the previous system was also socially engineered? You don't think that there was ideology? There was absolutely ideology in those previous systems.
No, I don't think there's ideology. There was cronyism and lack of accountability.
That in and of itself is a system.
We haven't fixed it. We've gone to the wrong problem. We've gone to identity politics. And now having a bigger HR system and more consultants coming in, there's less accountability. There's less transparency. Here we go. Agree or disagree? A company should prevent employees from using language that might be offensive to people of certain backgrounds.
An initiative to eliminate harmful language like beating a dead horse, turning a blind eye.
And that, my friends, is an example of a microaggression.
This is the whole microaggression thing, which is really tricky. Because a microaggression can be anything, really. You can ask somebody what time it is, and they will be like, "Are you testing my ability to tell time?" You know, anything can be a microaggression. Right. So that is a minefield right there. That said, there are some things I don't want to hear. I don't want to be called the N-word.
Yeah.
You know, so there is a line.
Yeah.
But that line has been moved substantially too far to the other side.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons why I have always rejected this idea of including psychological safety into the work that I did. Like for years, my team was like, "Bo, we have to start addressing psychological safety." And I go, no, because how psychologically safe a person feels has much more to do with like their entire life and the trauma and their own like self-confidence than anything that I can possibly do. And I'm not going to take responsibility for whether somebody goes to therapy or not.
I know DEI officers who would call you a white supremacist for saying that.
Oh, there are people. Yes, same thing happens with me, right? You said at one point you were like bleeding heart, and now you're like considered like a Nazi. Like I would say that some people would look at me calling me a capitalist pig, but I agree with you. There is too much over-policing of language, but there is a line wherein we know the N-word is problematic. That should not be in the workplace. Using any kind of racial slur or any genderedized, like the B word or the R word, that's like, you can't have that in the workplace.
I do agree. I think that there's lines that should not be crossed, but we've always had those lines. That's not a nuance of DEI. That's not a new thing. So I want to go back to the idea of psychological safety because I think that's really at the core of this question. So one interpretation is that you want to be in an environment where nothing will ever be said that harms you, even given your background, which is ludicrous, right? I mean, nobody could ever expect to do that. But the other way to think about psychological safety is the idea that you should be free to challenge others. It should be about being able to have a free exchange of ideas, as long as you're not directly attacking one another, but be able to challenge ideas.
But has DEI promoted a speak-up culture? As I would argue,
what I've
it has
tried to do
done
in
the
5 years as
opposite.
DEI officer is exactly that.
But it
It's
hasn't.
promoting challenges.
But the result is that
not everywhere. Like you know, like you're hearing two people who have done this work for an extremely long time, and we're giving you examples of how we've done the work.
And I'm saying that in the boardroom, right? When
I've been in the boardroom.
There is an echo chamber. In the past, you could do this. You can say, you know, line item 27 is wrong. The calculation is wrong, right? You see this horrible mistake. Today's world, you have to say like, oh, so sorry.
That it's not happening.
Can you please walk through line item 27 and explain to me how you calculated that number?
I literally had my board meeting 2 weeks ago. And I will tell you, that kind of rigor that you're talking about still exists.
I've never seen it. Never. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. I do not see that. I see much more of a council culture. There's very little speaking up.
That's not what I'm seeing in boardrooms. Okay. Agree or disagree? Companies should make statements about social issues and global affairs.
Disagree.
Disagree.
Delta CEO Ed Bastian is now strongly condemning Georgia's controversial new voting law.
Hundreds of multinational brands came out in support of Israel.
Apple, PayPal, and Salesforce have strongly criticized the law.
I'm going to give a more nuanced perspective on that, especially since 2020. I had employees come to me and say, we need to talk about this earthquake and we need to talk about this conflict in the Middle East. Eventually, the number of requests coming in saying this company should say something became so great that I created a rubric. And I said, 1, does this issue impact our business? Yes or no? If it's no, we don't say anything. If it's yes, then do we have expertise to comment on this issue? If the answer is no, we don't comment on it. And I would say most companies, 95% of the time, don't have the impact of the business, and the expertise. But in 5% of the time, I think that there is an opportunity to say something as relevant.
Academia is a very different space because I know people who would say a rubric is a white way of knowing. So when it comes to mentioning things like this, talking about social events and things like that, it's a no-brainer. You talk about it, especially if it involves a downtrodden group. And I think campuses should be neutral.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general they should remain neutral because their communities are very diverse and they're going to have many, many different opinions and they're going to be representing only one segment of that and not the others. The only exception, it's not truly an exception, just in terms of supporting communities that are impacted by a global event or something that happens to affect a certain group, being able to send a message to those individuals or a message of support to say, we're here for you, we realize your families have been impacted by this, whatever it is.
I mean, let's take climate change as an example, right? Most companies in 2020, 2021, made pledges to go net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero. Net zero emissions by 2050. 100% green by the year 2050.
Right, so everyone signed up to net zero, right? Go Greta Thunberg, let's save the environment. But really, what did net zero achieve? Net zero achieved, it was just image control. It was form over substance. So I'm absolutely adamant that businesses should just focus on what they do best, make good products and services, and stay completely out of the political arena.
So I actually agree with you. There was a similar initiative. It was 300 different CEOs of large Fortune 1000 companies who were all coming together to band together to support DEI. And my CEO of my company at the time said to me, they go, Bo, do you think I should join? And I said, absolutely not. And they were like, why? And I said, because this is a bunch of symbolic bull, and it's going to achieve absolutely nothing. I'd rather you spend your time focused on your organization, supporting the things that needed to happen, and you know what? Everybody cares about the shareholder price. So you get that shareholder price out of the 30s, and the CEO did his job, and he did it while also supporting DEI, but not engaging in any of this symbolic stuff. Too much of this work has become about virtue signal.
100%.
Every day, General Mills serves the world by making food people love. And inclusion is one of our secret ingredients.
Shop Black owned.
Mexican American owned.
Korean and queer owned.
One common DEI practice we can all agree needs to be eliminated is
training.
Hello, and welcome to Training on Workplace Harassment.
Diversity statements.
Most job applications require, a resume, maybe a few references. But at the University of Washington, you'll also need a one-page diversity statement.
I would just say there shouldn't be any DEI.
Is the Civil Rights Act enough?
Yeah, we have laws, right, and enforcement. So, we don't have enforcement. There's no enforcement anymore. That's been dismantled. The EEOC has completely
That's not true.
If that's the case, then that's the mission. We need to,
But that's not true. You work in organizations, you're telling me you've never seen a lawsuit where a woman or said person
but in the last 2 years,
and
it is not being implemented.
It happens all the time. There are tremendous settlements.
I would say one thing to eliminate is diversity offices.
I don't disagree with that.
Over the course of this conversation, I've changed my mind about everybody's looking at me. What I changed my mind about, I kind of already knew this, but I know it more now. There are a lot of people out there doing good work. I appreciate what you two are doing in your respective places, and keep up the good work if you can.
I would say I learned that maybe I underappreciated the degree to which DEI has been misconstrued, misused, maybe even abused, and leading to very, very poor and flawed implementations. And particularly hearing from Desiree about her experience has been really helpful to think about how these things get implemented across different sectors, different industries. I'm aware of the flaws and imperfections of it in the academic setting, but hearing about that in the corporate world is illuminating.
You want to go ahead? Well, what I appreciate in this conversation that everyone has been candid, but I do have to unfortunately say I haven't changed my mind about DEI. I just think that it is a flawed ideology we'll never progress and get to the really great stuff, the brilliance, if we're, cleansing everything and socially engineering things. I think we just overall lose out on innovation.
What I think I changed my mind about, or not really changed my mind about, but recognize something that I have to do more. So I need to play a larger role in helping to demystify what the work should look like, and also helping those who are opposed to the work understand that there is a better way of doing the work that will benefit all people, that will benefit companies. It will build better meritocracy, that will build more constructive conversation. But I think the loudest voices sometimes in the room are not the ones that are portraying the work in the best manner possible. So I think that is something that I'll take away from here is recognizing the need for a more robust about what good versus non-good DEI looks like.
So can I just ask a question, maybe building on what Bo just said about good versus not good DEI? Is there a world, let's say we can crush the whole thing right now and build it from scratch. Is there such a thing that what would good DEI look like to you?
Well, I would take the money that is in DEI departments anyway and use that to fund outreach programs for local high schools, middle schools, things like that. Yeah. That's what I would like to see.
So I'm more of a libertarian. I want to see smaller government, less bureaucracy. So the best way that we can improve opportunity is through economic growth. 1 billion people were pulled out of abject poverty since 1990 because of the capitalist system, because of access to fossil fuels.
I think the market's powerful, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let the market shake it out. Let's hire the best with as little intervention as possible.
I agree with you 100% in that we want to improve the quality of life for everybody. I think the only place, and I think truly where this conversation boils down to, is the mechanism by which we get there, right? And I think sometimes these conversations get so polarized that you think you're actually like trying to work towards different things. And if we could just simply get to the place where we're having difficult conversations, but we're not attacking character, we're talking about the mechanisms by which we get there. I think that's where we'll get to the best solutions.
This was a good example of a difficult conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Why don't we look northward for a moment to the state of Maine, where big apologies to all of the Janet Mills militia, Mills mafia. Janet Mills has dropped out, making Graham Plattner the presumptive Democratic nominee for Maine Senate. And why don't we start with a little video here.
The Mills militia has surrendered to the Nazis.
They've been routed.
Usually Maine, yes.
Yes. But why don't we take a look at our last hope to stop Graham
Emily's been spending a lot of time on Blue Sky with those takes.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I should.
That'd be awesome. If Emily was huge on Blue Sky for some reason.
Get on Blue Sky.
But there's one last chance to stop the Plattner menace here with Susan Collins. Let's take a listen to her reaction to these updates in the race.
Reaction to the Mills news. I'm sure this was a very difficult decision for Governor Mills, and I wish her well. She has devoted her life to public service in the state of Maine in many different capacities. She has served the people of our state, and I'm sure this was a hard decision for her.
Will Plattner be easier to beat in your view?
I'm not going to get into the November election at this point. This is the governor's day, and I think the focus should be on her and her wanting to give her message to the people of Maine.
Riveting stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but did Janet Mills then endorse Graham Plattner? Say that she's going to vote for him instead?
She did not. She very explicitly said that she would not be voting for Susan Collins. But she left open the possibility then of what she would be doing.
Good. She won't vote for the Republican. Okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
she said something like, I will carefully watch Graham Plattner's race and see, as I do with all races in Maine or some blah, blah, blah like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Schumer, though.
Yeah, Schumer did jump in, behind Plattner, which is obviously very different from his approach with Zoran Mamdani in his own state, and pretty remarkable given that they share, some very similar views, especially on Israel, which of course is a problem for Schumer. I do want to just, before we, jump into that aspect of it, just pause and reflect on what an extraordinary long shot campaign this was. This man, Graham Plattner, had never run for office before, started his race very early. We interviewed him, of course, here very early. And he was up against the sitting governor of Maine, who is not disliked in Maine, by the way. I mean, her approval rating is not like amazing, but it's not terrible either. And Democrats had like sort of, they were fine with her, but they really were impressed with Plattner. So when Mills gets in, of course, there's this huge oppo dump, and there was plenty there to work with, from the tattoo to all the Reddit posts to even, his history and his story about his military service and how long he continued to serve, and then, working with this, with this contractor in Afghanistan as well. And so there was a real national consensus that this was going to be the end of him, that, people were going to look at that and say, oh God, we can't have this guy. We need the electable candidate, Janet Mills. And that is just not what happened at all. In fact, the polar opposite happened. People became more fervently committed to Graham Plattner, and his polls just continued to rise to the place where it was undeniable he was going to emerge victorious. Now, there's all kinds of squabbling right now and pieces being written of this one leaking and that one leaking about how Schumer abandoned her and didn't put enough money behind her, et cetera, et cetera. But truly, whatever the behind the scenes internal machinations were, truly the bottom line here is that you had Graham Plattner, compared to Janet Mills, much younger, really forceful on Israel, really forceful on fighting against oligarchs. And this is where the normie Democratic base is at this point. They were not swayed by the electability arguments, which was most of what, the Mills camp really were offering here. Oh, Susan Collins is going to chew him up and spit him out. I think that is so different from what would have unfolded in previous cycles. And it also makes it very difficult. What we heard with Zoran Mamdani is, oh, well, that's New York City. It's blue. It's totally different. Well, here you have Maine. It's very sort of like normie state, a lot of blue collar workers, a state that in a lot of ways has been left behind as well, with relatively high poverty. And, you can no longer just blame the commie corridor types and the DSA types for wanting this type of candidate at this point.
Brooklyn.
That's right. And one last point here is that the polls consistently showed that Graham Plattner is a stronger candidate versus Susan Collins than Janet Mills was. And I think that also just completely blows the minds. I mean, they just can't accept, the general national consensus, the sort of establishment Democratic mindset just can't accept that he actually genuinely is a stronger candidate versus Susan Collins.
Yeah, and
to that polling point, go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, in the interesting, in the like catty backbiting pieces that are emerging with people pointing fingers at each other, to me the most substantial thing that emerged was Schumer's camp saying, okay, here are all the problems with Mills's camp and why it's actually her fault. But on the point of us not spending enough money for her, we couldn't, because it would have been too politically toxic. Because Graham,
I got that right here for you.
Yeah. So in other words, Graham had too much support from a majority of Democrats in the state, and therefore Schumer coming in would have been going up against a majority of the voters And there would have been then too much blowback against him and the National Party for meddling in Maine.
And Schumer is so unpopular himself.
Right.
That it would likely not help Janet Mills.
Exactly.
She already was seen as the Schumer candidate, and that was part of the problem for her.
And they dropped him. They dropped the negative ads. They went for it. And the polling yawned even further. After the negative ads from Mills came out. And then Collins' super PAC, funded by billionaires who have destroyed Maine, came out. They were actually not even as good. Like Mills had the fancy AI voice, which is extremely unethical. But they put
AI Plattner
through the Reddit posts, whereas the Collins post did the same thing, but they weren't even as well done. And I don't see how those are going to work either. And Emily, really curious for your take on this. He already has center left and the left locked up. Now Collins is going to run her campaign. And I'm seeing all the Republicans calling him a Nazi, and saying that making insensitive comments about women who were sexually assaulted. So, on what planet?
Going woke.
On what planet does that work with the right? The right has spent the last couple decades getting called or thinking they're always getting called Nazis, whether they're getting called Nazis or not. It's part of their identity that they're under siege and always being called Nazis. And now all of a sudden you've got the super PAC calling another guy a Nazi. Yep. Isn't that going to make them be like, well, actually, maybe he's one of us, falsely being accused of being a Nazi by the... How is this going to work on the right? Are they all of a sudden feminists? Are they all of a sudden just believing accusations that you're a Nazi?
No, I sent this to you guys yesterday. The first statement that the RNC put out called Graham Plattner a Nazi.
Yes,
and
awesome.
one of the reasons that the Mills campaign obviously did not work is because those attacks just don't work on Democrats even, let alone Republicans, to your point, Ryan. But obviously what they're going for in this race is going to be independents. And I will say, Susan Collins is notoriously hard to beat. She puts up a hell of a fight. Whatever you think of Susan Collins, that woman has shown a wild proclivity to hang on to the seat, or a wild ability to hang on to that seat, despite where the polls seem to look at different points. That was, what was her name? Sarah Gideon, right? The last time around.
Collins the whole time.
Cycle. Yeah, you go back cycle after cycle, and you can bet a lot of money is going to pour in. But it's truly it reminds me, Ryan, actually, of that John Ossoff ad that everyone was talking about on X over the course of this week, which I'm sure you guys saw. Mm-hmm. But it was Ossoff running not on any culture war issues. In fact, in the ad, he calls the culture war a distraction, which Plattner has as well. We don't have to debate that, but it's a really good political line. Because he puts that in the back burner and then deals with these kitchen table issues of corruption causing average Americans pain. And Crystal, you could probably speak to this too. What Winsome Sears did in Virginia was say that we can coast on Dems being woke. We're just going to throw the culture war at Abigail Spanberger over and over again and not really deal with the affordability stuff in a super high profile, or we're not going to make that a huge thrust or the only thrust of our campaign. And they've had these examples to learn from over and over again, but right away, right out the gate, it's Plattner is a Nazi. So enjoy how that works out for you guys.
Yeah. Well, and the thing with the Winsome Sears campaign, too, is then if you're the one running all of the trans bathroom and trans sports ads, then people go, wait a second, y'all are the ones that are obsessed with this issue. Abigail Spanberger is over here. Actually, she did a lot of I'm a national security Dem type of thing in Virginia, but she also did a lot of affordability messaging as well. We'll see what happens in the race, but I do think that things have become so polarized and partisan now, it's hard for me to see how Susan Collins hangs on. And you have the generic ballot gap in favor of Dems at this point is really quite extraordinary. One thing, Ryan, I wanted to ask you is in terms of the disparate treatment of Plattner versus Mamdani when they share very similar political ideology. If anything, I'd say Plattner has been a little more rough around the edges in terms of how he's talked about Israel and Hamas and these sorts of things than Zoran. There's, more to work with there if you're trying to sort of demonize him. Is Schumer's different approach a recognition of where the Democratic base is, or is it just racism that when he hears it from a white guy, he can stomach it? When he hears it from a brown Muslim, it's not acceptable?
I think some of it's racism, maybe some of it's his backyard, and then some of it is different, tactical environments. I think if Mills dropped out and was like, Maine is a state where independence is elevated, I am considering running as an independent, just like Angus King is an independent in Maine. Then maybe Schumer keeps his powder dry. And so in New York, Cuomo,
like Alaska.
Yeah, and in New York he had Cuomo as the independent, and so it's embarrassing for a Democrat to not back the Democrat, but he would rather win with Cuomo than be embarrassed and back Mamdani. So I think he was left with no choice in Maine. It's like, this is the guy, like he's the nominee, and she's not running as an independent. So I think that distinction played a role too. But I don't know, I think some of it's also just racism and rooted in kind of who they are.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we take a listen to the man himself speaking to Jon Stewart this week.
There has been more reach out from, I would say, more kind of like establishment folks. However, this is the important part. Not from the DSCC, not from the DNC. Nobody in the places of power remains interested.
But they're lost, dude. They're lost.
And the thing that bothers me the most isn't I'm not asking for you to be my friend. But you should be curious because I'm pulling 40 points ahead.
Right.
At least just reach out and be like, hey, what are you actually? Because they've never spoken ever. I've never gotten a phone call.
Never gotten a phone call.
I think it was Hassan who said, look like a chud, think like a woke. That's Plattner. That's the winning model. But, Ryan, I think you identified actually the biggest pitfall for him, which is that Tim Walz is about to come campaign for him in the state. And as much as we might get irritated, why isn't the party even reaching out to him? On the other hand, it's actually really great for him to be have some separation from the Democratic Party brand, because we all know the Democratic Party brand is extremely toxic. Every dyed-in-the-wool Democrat is going to vote for Graham Plattner. The question is people who are, more independent and sort of disgusted with national Democrats, are they going to be on board with him? And so the more that he's sort of subsumed now into that standard issue Democratic Party brand, I actually think that's a more of a peril for him than anything else.
Like Dan Osborne.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, I would have Osborne come out there. If I were in Graham's camp, I'd have Osborne come out. I'd keep having Sean Fain and other union leaders come out. Bernie. But Tim Walz, maybe old Tim Walz, before he was.
Yeah.
But he's tainted by that VP run. That is the risk, that he starts to look like a part of the bog. But I assume that he gets that. But here comes Tim Walz, so we'll keep an eye out.
It's interesting that Tim Walz decided, of all the candidates, that let me go campaign with this one. That's kind of an interesting choice to me.
After Mills drops out too. Okay.
Right, that's before that. But his campaign manager, Graham, had a press conference yesterday afternoon, and one of the things his campaign manager said on there is that I don't have the exact number, but they started doing the math on the number of individuals that he had spoken to directly, and it was something approaching a scale. They have taken these one-on-one conversations that he's had at all of these town halls, and they're scaling it up into the tens or even hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
So, and they were saying that when they did some research and polling, they kept coming across people in their polling, huge numbers, whose reason that they were supporting Plattner is that they had met Plattner personally. and were swayed by him, that is a incredible buffer against the negative ads. You see it on TV, like, oh, I saw that guy.
I saw Semaphore had a piece quoting some, I don't know, Republican strategists who were like, oh, we're gonna destroy him, we're gonna drop all this money on him, we're gonna do all these negative ads. And it's like, I mean, I'm sure they'll be able to bang up his favorability rating some, but it's not like the Mills people and Schumer people didn't try. So, I think he is somewhat inoculated from the type of attacks that they've been launching, unless they have something different that we haven't yet seen. You never know. But your point about Maine is an important one, and I don't have any deep familiarity with the state. But from watching, you guys reporter there, and Alex Seitzwald, who also moved back to Maine and has been doing reporting on the ground there. And I also have a close friend who's grew up in Maine, and he grew up in Maine. He hasn't lived there in years. And he still was like, what was that guy's name who you said is running? And he reached out to his buddies and, of course, had some kind of a connection to him because it's a very small state. And it's much more, there's still, my sense is there's still a lot more sort of community cohesion in Maine than there is in a lot of the country. And that's part of what has allowed Susan Collins to be able to win for so long, because she, there are a lot of people there I know her personally and she did this and I saw her there or whatever. But it's also something that can benefit Graham because he is deeply immersed in, Maine community and has been running a campaign. And even before his campaign, he was a, grassroots organizer, and this is what he was doing. So I do think that is a huge advantage for him and will help to inoculate him against some of those negative attacks that are inevitably coming.
Yeah. Well, the negative attacks, I'm going to give some advice to the Republican oppo for a second. It can't be that he's a Nazi, but maybe the tattoo he has is actually trans somehow. Maybe it's part of the trans community.
Isn't there the trans socialist militia?
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Now we're getting closer to something. And it's actually, it has its roots in Black Lives Matter. So I would go that direction with the tattoo.
There is some culture stuff that they can make inroads with him on, but what Maine Democrats just showed, I think, is going to apply to Maine voters overall. They have serious affordability concerns. They have kitchen table problems, and they want somebody who is going to address that first and foremost. So they don't trust the political establishment. Susan Collins is the political establishment. The difference in some of these, especially more rural states, is that Susan Collins comes across as the antithesis. And to us, that might seem strange, but she comes across as the antithesis to some people of DC politics because she's on the ground. She's a very good grassroots politician. She goes to all of the events. That's how she's been able to hang on. And she votes against her own party sometimes in big decisions, not always, but sometimes in these big decisions. So that is what they'll have to contend with. But if it's just going to be culture war attacks, that's obviously not going to work. It didn't work for Andrew Cuomo. It's not going to work in Maine either.
Well, we mentioned Tim Walz and the Democratic Party stained by the 2024 race, so I thought we should end this segment with a very interesting interview on Pod Save America between Jon Favreau and DNC Chair Penn Martin. Now, there has been a 2024 autopsy on the 2024 race, what happened, why they lost, and it's been kept under lock and key, to which Jon Favreau has some questions about why Penn has not released it. This is a little long and a little inside baseball, but I think it's worth a listen. Let's take a listen.
I want to start with the 2024 autopsy, which you call an after-action review. When you won the chairmanship in February of 25, you criticized the DNC's refusal to release their 2016 autopsy as exactly what not to do. You said, quote, "Was there any utility in doing that?" And then promised your 2024 autopsy would be different. Your exact quote was, "Of course it will be released." Why did you change your mind on that?
Well, look, I mean, what I said all along, even when I ran for this position, is that we were going to focus on the things that will help us win the upcoming election, right? Making sure that we learn the right lessons that could help inform our victories. And that's what we've done. We said this when we sent out the press release back in November saying we weren't going to release the report. We were going to actually keep our focus on those lessons, and we released those lessons. We continue to do that. So it's not completely accurate to say that we didn't release that. Where we're keeping our focus is on the lessons that can actually help us win.
On this show in August, you told me this about releasing the review, quote, "We have to do it to give people who invested so much time, energy, and money a sense of what happened and why we lost, especially why we lost." So what changed between August and December? I understand there are lessons, but those are not the full report. Why not release the full report? What's in the report that you wouldn't want to publicize?
Yeah, there's no smoking gun in the report. And I know that's what everyone's so eager to learn. I mean, the smoking gun. Guess what, John?
But if there's no smoking gun, why wouldn't you just release it then?
Because we want to keep the focus on the lessons. Because what ends up happening here is that people, of course, want to weaponize the report in a way to look backwards, to point fingers, place blame in a way that actually doesn't keep us focused on the upcoming election. But instead, the navel gazing of focusing backwards actually takes us backwards. We're 189 days from this election, John. What we don't need to be focused on is actually relitigating 2024. What we need to do is learn the lessons of 24 and the years preceding that can help us win this upcoming election. I get why people are obsessed with it, because there's various groups and organizations and people who think there's some sort of smoking gun in there. Guess what, John? In the third closest presidential election in the last 100 years, everything mattered. There's nothing that didn't impact that election.
Why did you spend the money going to 50 states, doing all these interviews, doing all this stuff, and doing this report in the first place, if you weren't going to release the full results of it? Like, why? I don't get why just you and some of the senior DNC people get to see it, but not most of the DNC members who are, state party chairs. I mean, more than a dozen DNC members told NBC just the other week they want it released, including Congresswoman Delia Ramirez and North Carolina Democratic Party Chair Anderson Clayton. And Anderson said, quote, "Genuinely, what did you all find that we did not?"
And just the top comment on YouTube for that PodSafe interview is, "We are so fucked." Guys,
evergreen sentiment.
I'm going to put the question to you. What could the lesson possibly be that is being hidden here?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point. They don't want to put out that the funding and supporting of a genocide in Gaza was actually a political problem. It was not only a moral atrocity, but it was also a political problem for them. I think it's pretty clear at this point. But, Ryan, I'm curious if you have anything on this. First of all, we just have to pause and reflect on what he's trying to sell there, which is he's like, we need to not look backwards, but we do need to learn the lessons so we can win. Well, it's like, but the whole point of this was to learn the lessons so that you could win. It reminds me very much of the Republicans who, whenever they'd get asked about whether or not 2020 was rigged and whether or not Donald Trump really won and Joe Biden was the rightful president, we shouldn't look backwards. We shouldn't look backwards. Clearly just trying to dodge all of this. The way he's handled is so foolish, because let's say you put out the full report and it did say something that was inconvenient about Gaza. Like, that would be old news by now. No one would be talking about it anymore. It would be, we'd be 3,000 news cycles later at this point. But because they didn't release it, now it's this whole thing. I did see, though, Ryan, some speculation on Twitter that perhaps they didn't even completely finish the report, and that might be part of why they never put it out. So I don't know if that is possibly part of what's going on here, too.
I think that's plausible. And I also think, so think about what it was, mid-July? When did he finally drop out? It was like August? Right before the convention-ish.
When did Sagar get married? Because that's when he dropped out.
It was July.
Sagar played his wedding around there.
It was July, yeah.
In any event, so in a very short period, they raised and spent $1 billion.
$1 billion, yeah.
And there are very specific. It's not they is very broad. There are very specific consultants and factions and people that spent that $1 billion. How did they spend it? Who did they give it to? What consultants walked away with tens of millions? What firms got paid hundreds of millions? Because we're talking like $1 billion that's an endless amount of money. It's difficult to spend that amount of money in that amount of time. And so I think that's also, they don't want those details necessarily spilled out. Because A, they would be weaponized by other consultants who felt like they should have been the ones that got to spend all of this money. And also, just generally, it gives people like us information that we can talk about and like, wow, $190 million doing this, that didn't work. Like, you should be in jail. So I think that's a significant part of it too, that there's so much money involved that it's just better for them to say, well, we learned some lessons. Trust us that these are the correct lessons that we should learn from this, and just follow our guidance going forward. Don't worry
what are the current lessons being released that are okay for normal people's eyes to view? Is it that we need to pivot more to the right, that we need to not talk about trans issues? What are these lessons that have been
actually? What even are the lessons that Ken Martin said?
I think the lessons are, don't be mean to me, and please keep my job.
Ryan, what's the Barney Frank thing? Didn't Barney Frank come out? I actually assume it's probably similar to that. Didn't Barney Frank come out this week? Crystal, you might know this too, and say...
Yeah, I just saw the headline. He's like dying and decided to, as his last act on Earth, to release some book bashing the left, talking about how
that's my
left,
plan.
Which is actually perfect legacy for him, to be honest with you.
Yeah, love Barney Frank.
All right, so just that Pod Save America commenter, I think we are all feeling that way right now about the DNC.
Shout out to Favreau, though. He did a great job of that interview. Very persistent, really good lines of questioning. And it is inside baseball. There's no doubt about it. But it's still, very important to see the way that this apparatus functions or doesn't function, who it protects, what messages they find it convenient to put out, and what things they want to keep hidden forever. And also just, to me, again, the mind-blowing incompetence of not understanding the way that the media works, and that it's going to be so much more of an interesting story if it remains hidden, versus if you just took the blow, put it out, and then everybody can just move on.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free, and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show. Help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.